There are 28 days until the MLS regular season kicks off. There are 28 clubs for us to cover, which means it is officially time to start breaking down pre-season review for all 28 teams. Over the next month, I am going to bring you 7 different videos that is going to cover 4 teams per video. We are going to jump straight into things right now. Here we go. All right, so I put together a little cheat sheet for you guys to be able to see the projections that I'm making for all of these different teams. We're going to start with the 6 Champions League teams since their seasons start a little bit earlier, their roster's a little bit more complete, and then we are going to move into the rest of the league from there. So for today, we have 4 teams that are all in the Champions League: New England, New York City, Seattle, and Colorado. So we're going to go through each of these team by team. We're going to go through all of the different steps as well. But here we go. So first of all, we have the New England Revolution, last year's Supporters Shield winners. Big transfers in for Sebastian Lletget, Omar Gonzalez less so, but he should take up a little bit of time on the back line for New England. Big transfers out. Tajon Buchanan is a big one. Teal Bunbury loses them a little bit of leadership. Scott Caldwell has also left the club. Buxa potentially might leave the club. We're still waiting to see if he returns or not. He's been heavily linked to some overseas transfers, so keep an eye on that situation. And then we know Matt Turner is headed to Arsenal in the summertime, so he will be here for the first half of the season. He will still play in CONCACAF Champions League, which is big news for New England, but he will not be available come playoff time. Key youngster for New England. They don't really have a ton of great youngsters, but I selected Noel Buck. He's got a little bit of hype. He's a very, very young kid, only 16 years old. Maybe one for the very distant future. Probably not going to get a ton of playing time this year, but just a guy to keep an eye out for as he is on the MLS roster. The age of 16 is very, very impressive. Biggest loser is Andrew Farrell, and for a couple of different reasons. The entire New England defense is going to suffer once Turner leaves. He is a fantastic goalkeeper. They are not going to be able to replace his quality in the back. So that's going to hurt the entire defense. From Farrell specifically, I'm thinking Omar Gonzalez may steal a few starts from Andrew Farrell specifically. Kessler is the other center back that they have, and I think Kessler is a little bit more entrenched in that starting lineup. So I would think Andrew Farrell would be the one to give a few starts to Omar Gonzalez here and there. Again, I still think Farrell is the starter, but I think Omar Gonzalez cuts into his time a little bit. So for those reasons, I think Farrell is probably the player that has the least chance to kind of surpass what they did last year. Best 11, and this is just my opinion of the best 11 for each of these teams, does not necessarily mean that this is what the actual starting lineups are going to be. I tried to select the correct formation, but not all the time am I going to get the correct formation, especially when there's coaching changes involved. Different coaches will have different favorites. They'll have different starting lineups. But this is just what I have selected as best 11. We have Turner until he leaves, Kessler, Farrell, Jones, By, Polster, Lletget, Charleston, Heel, Bow, and Buxa. So Charleston would take Tajon Buchanan's spot. The rest of that starting lineup was pretty standard last year for New England during their big campaign. New England doesn't really have a deep squad. Bruce Arena isn't going to rotate a whole lot. So these starters are pretty nailed on for the most part. Next up, we're going to go to NYCFC. So the defending champs have not made a transfer in that I can tell that's notable. They have lost a bunch of players though. Jesus Medina, Ismail Tajori-Shradi, James Sands, Gudmundur Tor-Aronson, and probably Tati Castellanos. Tati wanted to leave last summer. They wouldn't let him leave during the summer. And now there are heavy rumors of Tati leaving. We are getting close to the transfer deadline. So he's been linked to South America though, so I think they do have a little while longer to get that deal over the line. And I think they are talking about some pretty big numbers, so not a huge surprise that this is taking a long time. I do still think Tati will probably end up leaving, but as of right now, Tati Castellanos is still in the best 11 for NYCFC until he leaves. Key youngster is Thales Magno. They paid a ton for Thales Magno. A really, really talented player from Brazil. Started to kind of show those flashes toward the end of last year and into the playoffs. Really good young player. Another one could be Tavon Gray, although not sure if he's a starter with everybody healthy, but definitely a couple decent players to keep an eye on for NYCFC. Biggest loser, I think, is Maxi Morales, just because he's not going to have as big a role this year. Not a DP anymore. His salary has been way reduced. They were willing to let him walk, but he decides to come back on a much lower salary. I think he'll be more of a rotational piece like we saw from Sebastian Blanco and Diego Valeri in Portland last year. Ilsinho is another one that comes to mind. It's kind of that super sub, that spark plug that comes in off the bench. Really good for the team to have him back, but not necessarily great from a Sawyer perspective. You're going to be heavily reliant on him to get his decisives. So if you are going to roll with Maxi Morales, just keep that in mind, that he may not be a starter every single week. Sean Johnson is an easy one. Callens, Chanot, Amundsen. Tinnerholm, once he comes back from injury, I'm not sure exactly how long that injury is going to keep him out. Tavon Gray has this spot until Tinnerholm does come back. Keaton Parks is back. Morales was really good last year. Rodriguez, Talis Magno, Andrade, and until he leaves, Tati Castellanos is in the best 11. So we'll take a look at the full roster here. Chris Gloucester had a little bit of hype coming back to the States. I think he was in Holland maybe, playing pretty well. Amundsen is still the starter at left back, I think, though. Tinnerholm and Tavon Gray are the two right backs. Keaton Parks, Acevedo will probably get a good chunk of time as well. Alfredo Morales is a really good player. Justin Hack is also pretty good. He was at Hartford this past season in the USL. But if he does make the full roster, he may get a little bit of time. Santiago Rodriguez, also very good player. Maxi Morales, obviously we've talked about him as a rotational piece. Talis Magno is a absolute bona fide star if he can figure it out in MLS. Thiago Andrade and Tati Castellanos. Hey Bear, if Castellanos leaves, which I expect he will, Hey Bear would be the starter at center forward. And he was a very good player. He was hurt most of last season, but he was a very good player in past years for NYCFC. So Hey Bear may be a little bit of an under-the-radar striker. Next up, we go to Seattle. So big transfer in for Albert Rusnak. That is a monster. That pretty much locks up their front six. Their front six is absolutely absurd if they have everybody healthy. This is a very talented team that Seattle has put together. They still have enough defense, in my opinion, to be real contenders. I think they should be the favorites for the Supporters' Shield. Anything can happen in the playoffs, but if they're clicking, they could really challenge for MLS Cup. Not a ton of departures. Did lose the center back, Shane O'Neill, and the left back, I believe, Brad Smith. So the back line a little weak. They may need to make a signing or two as like a depth piece back there. But the front six is absolutely loaded. Key youngster, Danny Leyva, got a lot of time last year as a 17-year-old. Really impressed as well. Josh Atencio would also be in this category of key youngsters. Just the front six on this team is so good, though, that those two are going to have a real hard time actually getting any time with anybody healthy. The biggest loser for me is Kellen Rowe, because he was in that front six. They still have to feed Danny Leyva and Josh Atencio ahead of Kellen Rowe, in my opinion. So I kind of doubt that Kellen Rowe plays a significant part of this team. He may still be that super sub bench player, but for me, he's not a starter. Best 11 is Stefan Fry, Yeimar Orega, Nuhu, which is an incredibly talented back line. And then Alex Roldan on the right. I have Nuhu playing as a left back. And then I have two defensive mids with Roldan and João Paulo. Jordan Morris, Rusnak, Ladero, and Rui Diaz up top. This is easily the best 11 in MLS, period. End of story. You're not going to find anything better. I love the offensive stack possibilities here. Any of these six guys you could combine and have an absolutely superb stack. Taking a look at the Sounders roster, Stefan Fry returns as the goalkeeper. I think Cleveland has come back. I think he'll be another backup for another year. One of the better backups in the league, so definitely a stash, just in case Fry retires at the end of the season as well. If you can get your hands on Stefan Cleveland pretty cheap, probably a good idea. Yeimar and Orega, I think, are the back two. Nuhu can play the left side of three center backs, or he can play a left back. They do have Roldan at right back. This back line is just a little thin for my liking, but overall they're very talented players. So as long as these guys stay healthy, this team is going to be incredibly difficult to beat. And then you get to the midfield and forward. I mean, Leyva, Atencio, Roldan, Rowe. I mean, Baker Whiting is an ultra talented player as well. He probably won't see the field at all. Ladero, João Paulo, Rusnak, Morris, Chu, Rui Diaz, Bruin, although Bruin might leave. All of those guys are starting caliber MLS players and really, really good caliber MLS players. And then finally, we have the defending Western Conference champions with Colorado. We have transfers in of Max from Brazil, Kita from Columbus, and Brian Acosta from Dallas. Transfers out, Sam Vines, Kellen Acosta, Cole Bassett, Nick Mosqueda, Badgie, and then Trusty will be leaving in the summer to join up with Arsenal. Key youngster would be Darren Yappy. I don't know how much time he gets this year, as they do also have kind of a loaded front pack. Not quite as talented as Seattle's, but a lot of players that can contribute to an MLS team. So I don't know how much he really contributes, but he is a guy that I've heard a lot about and a guy who potentially will start to get minutes at some point in his career. Biggest loser, I think, is Brian Acosta, just because he goes to Colorado, and I'm not sure that he's a starter. I think he probably ends up starting on this team, but I'm not 100% sure. The front pieces are just all over the place for Colorado. Their best 11, Yarborough, Trusty, Abubakar, Wilson. As long as they stick with the back three, these guys are nailed on. Rosenberry's very good. I don't know who the left back is going to be. They were playing with Kellen Acosta as a left back at times last year, but Estevez, I guess, would be the guy that steps in there. Two holding midfielders, Price and Kay, are kind of nailed on. And then the front three, I'm not too sure about either. I have Rubio, Galvin, and Shinyashiki, although I think Barrios is going to make some contributions to this team. Jonathan Lewis, I think, will make some contributions to this team. So if they end up playing with a back five, I think they'll only have two midfielders in the middle, and I think that has to be Kay and Price, which means Brian Acosta either would have to play as like a 10 further forward. I don't know if they would have a 10, though. They would only have a front three. So I don't know what they are going to do as far as Brian Acosta. He seems like he should be a bigger part of their team, but I know they want to get Max involved as well. Don't know how MLS ready he's going to be coming out of Brazil, just 20 years old. Typically, those guys take a year or two to get their feet underneath of them. And then just a lot of guys that can contribute here with Shinyashiki, Lewis, Barrios, Galvin, Rubio, Yappy. Just a lot of guys in this front three that I think are going to kind of eat each other's minutes a little bit. So I don't know if there's a confirmed, nailed-on starting three. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit closer to that as we go. But Colorado is definitely not one that has a nailed-on starting lineup.